Architecture is actually a repository for memory. If you have to explain it, you've lost the battle. Something you don't know. You must have faith that you'll find out. You don't need an explanation. If someone sees that beauty, they recognize it.
Welcome back to another episode of Architecture Playbook podcast series, Intent to Impact. Today in our podcast, we have a very special guest, Prem Chandavarkar, who is the principal architect and the founder of CNT Architects. We are very glad to have you on our podcast, sir. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. And by the way, I'm not the founder. It is a legacy firm that dates back to a generation before mine.
Oh, that's
So I have just continued a legacy. In fact, this was Bangalore's first architecture firm. And where we are sitting, there has been an architecture practice in this location for 73 years now.
Okay. 4 decades in your journey. Can you actually take us back how CNT actually started?
There was a firm which was founded in 1950 by Prem Chandavarkar, my father. And he established the office here in 1953. So that's what 73 years it is this year. And he unfortunately died very young. He was only 39. That was in 1963. And my mother, who was not a trained architect, but whatever she knew was from conversations with my father, her name was Tara Chandavarkar. She felt the goodwill generated in that effort to introduce modern architecture to Bangalore was too precious to be lost. So she decided to continue the firm. And she brought in a new architect partner, Mr. Pacey Thacker. So the new firm created in 1963 was called Chandavarkar and Thacker.
Okay.
And everyone used to refer to it as CNT because that's a very long name to say. So in 2010, we officially changed the name to CNT Architects.
Yes, sir. I have noticed in your logo also that you always tell the doors are always open. What is the intent behind?
The intent is to create a collaborative culture of practice. When we look at the cutting edge of architecture, we tend to name individuals. We say a name, Charles Correa, Balkrishna Doshi, Zaha Hadid, Frank Gehry, Renzo Piano. We tend to name people. There's no doubt that model of practice has created some wonderful architecture, but I felt it has created a culture of heroes and imitators, which has not served the profession as a whole well.
Right.
So I felt what was needed was a practice that was design-centric but not personality-centric, which works more on a collaborative basis. So there's not one key person who's driving the design thinking of the firm. And that collaboration extends to whoever we work with, our clients, etc. So there's co-creation of value because the best results are when multiple people involved with the project are sitting around a table feeling like they're part of the same team. So with that, we decided the name of the firm should not contain the name of a person. And since everyone referred to us as CNT, we changed the name because it was a continuation of the colloquial name we had. But the new name, which didn't contain an individual's name, reflected our value system.
It's such a beautiful vision. I can see so much of generosity coming in through architecture and through your work. For example, if you are getting an opportunity to be a dean of architecture schools and colleges, what are the 3 subjects which you want to actually add into the education in architecture colleges and schools? And what are the things which you want to change?
I would put a different emphasis.
Okay.
The problem we have in India is that we tend to think that the quality of the architectural program, education program is driven largely by the syllabus. But I don't think that is the case. I think it is driven by pedagogy, the teacher to student connect in the studio and classroom. And I was influenced by this, by a statement made by the first architect I worked for after graduating from architecture school. That was Murad Chaudhry in Delhi, Kanwande Rayan Chaudhry. And he was a teacher at heart. He had been teaching till quite recently, but had become too busy in his practice, so he had stopped. And he said to me that I can't teach architecture because architecture is not teachable in that sense. But I can go into the College of Architecture and communicate my passion for architecture. And if the student gets infected by that passion, then that student will learn architecture.
That's so true.
So the problem with the syllabus oriented approach is that it creates what the Brazilian educationist Paulo Freire said, a demotivating structure. It puts the motive for being in the classroom as something outside the classroom. The grade you will get at the end of the semester, the job you will get after you graduate. And he said that we have to transform the classroom from a place of uh, transferring knowledge to a place of making knowledge. So for that, that spark of connect that Murad Chaudhry spoke about, that infection of passion, and you got to realize that the transmission of teaching is by infection, not by persuasion or explanation, and that's very important, and that creates the excitement of being in the classroom. And if you go into a college of architecture that is a really good college, you will see that spark in the pedagogy because you'll see that in the buzz of conversation. You will sense that you hear. You're not going to know the syllabus when you walk into the college. But is it a good college? You got to feel the buzz. And that buzz can come from the kind of pedagogy you create where it's a connect between teacher and student. So it's really about making the student. It's not about making a discipline. You have to make the person so that they go on and they become lifetime learners and they're always seeking. So you have to light that spark within them. So Aristotle said many centuries ago that education is about kindling a flame and not filling a vessel. So, so I would say that that's what needs to be the foundation. And for that, who teaches becomes very important because that teacher should have had that spark within them. They're excited about architecture. They should have the passion. Except you have to be a little careful because passion can get aggressive. So passion must always live along with her twin sister, which is compassion.
Wow.
So I
So
think
good.
I think that is what I would be interested in a college of architecture. And that when I say that I try and do CNT as a structure CNT as a collaborative practice, I want that spark also to be part of the conversation to drive that.
As I see CNT, as I was a architecture student, sir, we used to have case study from CNT to know how the work. It is more not a firm for us. It is more of an institute where we could learn and understand things better. And in my career, when I was in eighth semester, I was really, how you're telling me, it is more about how the teacher affects the student. One of the teacher, she used to teach me building construction, and her name is Parul Paul. She's a principal of Devoid Studio. Out of nowhere, I was like, I want to learn how she is doing. She was a part-time faculty. She used to teach as well as do practice. So whenever possible, she used to come and teach us. I just asked, ma'am, can I also like start practicing with you? You need not to pay nothing, but I want to learn from you. I really want to learn from you. She's like, I can pay you, don't worry. Let's start working. I was in my urban design itself, I started practicing. I did not wait it for internship also because I really matched with her, and God's grace, she became my guru. And I took internship with her itself. It became a I could see a building's full life cycle, not just 6 months. I was there more than a year with her. Because of that, I learned so much more on the ground rather than in the classroom.
For what you're talking about, we need spaces where theory and practice coexist. And unfortunately, we've tended to separate them. We believe theory belongs in the world of academia, and then you leave it behind and practice. And practice belongs to the world of firms that are doing architecture. But actually, they work best when they're in the same space and each is critiquing the other because they have different impulses, and you keep your balance when both things coexist. So actually, you learn from a practitioner who's not just whose interest is more than doing projects. In a sense, that's what happened in the case that you cited, because she was interested in wider questions of what is architecture, and the projects was just a means, a means to ask those wider questions. So the practice becomes a reflective space, not just a executing space, not just a transactional space for doing things. So and it's the same thing in college. You need this. That unfortunately in college theory tends to be taught as though it's foundational to practice. But it
Yes.
should be taught so that theory questions practice, practice questions theory. That should be the kind of dialogue that happens. And so we need to combine these spaces.
Many architects now are remembered for the work they have done. What is your take for what legacy you want to leave behind as an architect for the entire industry?
I need to start with the fact that I inherited a legacy, so I'm not just creating a legacy. And a lot of people would say to me, you had it made. It's very easy for you because there's an established firm that was handed to you. And yes, that's true, but there was something in the same situation that also made it more difficult. So I realized that when you set up your own practice and you started it from scratch, you have the freedom to indulge your own desire. When you inherit a legacy, you immediately feel an obligation to something that's greater than yourself. You can't just do whatever you like. And you have to think about what is the value system. And so I had to think quite a bit about what that legacy meant. And I realized the impulse was very different. I studied in the School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi in the early 70s, 1970s. And at that time, a lot of the teachers were a lot of the top architects in Delhi. I studied architecture in the School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi in the early 1970s. And a lot of the teachers at that time were the top practicing architects in Delhi and in fact nationally reputed. And the Corbusian idiom, the impact of Chandigarh was dominated architecture in those years. And I was struck by the fact that CNT never got into that idiom.
Okay.
Even though my father, who got early in his practice, got a job in Pinjore, which is just outside Chandigarh, his first large project. And somewhere around 1960, he spent about a year and a half spending as much time in Chandigarh as in Bangalore. That's an extremely historically loaded time to be there. So how was he there at that loaded time and stayed free from that influence? And I realized that the impulse was very different. It was not asking what should symbolize Indian modernity, these grand questions. What is the kind of architecture that would symbolize it? It was a much more restricted impulse. It was more contextual, more humble. And the goal was to say, how can we practice architecture in a way that earns the affection and respect of the community within which we practice? And you realize the extent to which he did that because he died in 1963. That's 63 years ago. And just recently, a couple of weeks ago, my wife went to a jewelry shop for some to buy something, and that jeweler was also a legacy practice that had been around since then. And it turned out that the person running the shop, his father had interacted with my father. And he saw my wife's name and said, "Are you from the architect family, Chandavarkars, and she said yes. And then he spoke about how his father would talk about my father. So obviously, such an impact was made that it's transmitted across generations and is still a point of conversation.
Just by the name, they knew, oh, he's the person. That's
Yes,
amazing.
but the fact is they had interacted with him and had that, and that impact had been made at a person to person level.
Yes, that
Not at
memory
some-
of him is.
Not at some philosophy of
Yes.
architecture, deliver a successful project level. That it had gone to the next generation and they were talking about it. And it evoked that memory when the name was heard. So obviously the goal of earning the affection and respect of the community within which you practice was achieved. And so that's what one would like to do. And when you do that, you try and do an architecture that's not just about visual impact. It's the test of a good building is not do you see it and say, wow, do you inhabit it for some years and look back at those years of perfection. So you have to have that real empathy for who's going to inhabit your architecture. That's what we try to do. I won't say that we are masters of doing it, but that is at least the goal to which we try and aim. So that's the legacy you want to create of just making an impact to what comes after you. So you value the legacy that you have received, and then you think about the legacy you will receive not in terms of what you have done, but in terms of its impact. Actually, you start thinking about being a good ancestor.
It also answers those questions very humbly, because architecture is a very collaborative place. It is not just about one architect, but we have to collaborate with contractors, suppliers, and so many people. So how you're telling it is more about how people are getting impacted, not just the construction. How many people be affected is there.
Yeah, but you got to remember that a lot of the collaboration is very transactional. It's just aimed at getting things done. And it doesn't mean you suppress yourself to. What you have to do is you have to go into the core of being a human yourself, a good human, and bring that and bring the sensitivities, because there are lots of things that we can only know from our experience.
So, according to you, do you think so? Clients will go with the good design, or would they go with the architect who understands, or have that connect with them more? It's okay if the design is little mediocre, but the architect connects with
you have
them.
to do. It's got to be both. I read a very interesting um, case study of there's this major museum in the US. I don't remember the details of which city it was in. And they were interviewing architects for a major extension of the museum. And they were interviewing a lot of the top names, the real superstars of architecture from across the world. And they eventually selected Renzo Piano. And but someone asked, on what basis did you select? Did you like his architecture the most? And they say the thing that dipped the balance, we interviewed some 6 or 7 really famous architects. He was the only one who asked to see our current collection.
Wow.
So I think that, but he is a good architect too.
Yes.
That counts. But I think that degree of empathy you show, and the fact that only 1 out of 6 or 7 architects actually said that, shows that that empathy is not something that architects necessarily feel. And I think the problem is in the way we are trained, because in college we are always next to our design talking about it. Whether it is the studio crit or the end of semester jury, we are always talking about our project. And then once we graduate, we read architecture magazines and interviews and attend lectures by famous architects. So we always hear architects talking.
Yes.
So we tend to think that the meaning, as an architect, the meaning of the work I do is put in by me. But what actually happens in practice is when you complete your project and hand it over for inhabitation, you disappear from the scene. So there's a moment beyond which you're forever silent. And as architects, we have to come to terms with that silence. And there's actually a process of inhabitation that breathes meaning into it. Because people inhabit your space, they might enjoy it. There's something in the space that might provoke them to connect with nature. There's something in the space might promote a certain kind of conviviality and social joy. And then those lead to memories. And architecture is actually a repository for memory, to design for that. And when you start thinking about that, you design very differently. So if I design a house, I start thinking of verandas and niches and bay windows and bookshelves and steps and tectonic elements that I feel are sticky to memory. So you design for experience and you design for an experience that breeds memory. And yeah, that's really what. So it's not your voice. You're actually laying the foundations for a life that's totally beyond you. You are just a small channel in allowing that voice to, allowing that life to,
Grow.
to grow, to
Yes.
flourish. I always believe in a statement that Mother Teresa made. She said, "You can't do great things. You can only do small things with great love."
What do you think? So, what is the right time to start the practice on our own, or we should work under some, good architect and then start our own practice? What is the good time for a young architect to look at it?
You need to build a certain amount of uh, depth and confidence in yourself, and you need these reflective pauses. So I always advise youngsters I meet that, for example, never go straight from a bachelor's to a master's.
Why?
Because you just finished your bachelor's and you need to think, what do I need to study for? Why am I studying for? You need to pause to reflect on that and you step out to another experience. If you don't do that, you'll just wind up doing the equivalent of a 7-year bachelor's degree because you'll just continue in the same mode. The idea is to grow as a person, right? So you need those reflective pauses. And then you need to reach a level where if you start your practice, you have to feel I am worthy of the trust the client will impose. You have to think about what that is. So I had the option of straight after finishing my BR to come to CNT. I did not do that. And in hindsight, I think that was the best thing I could have done. Because I said I come in with a family advantage if I grow in the firm, I'll never know whether am I growing just because of myself or am I growing because of who I am, the name I am carrying. So I worked for Kanmande Rai and Chaudhary also to give the space before I wanted to do a master's. Then I felt that my training in SPA Delhi had been technically strong but philosophically weak. I said I want to do a more research-oriented master's. I have innately I'm also a reflective philosophical person, so I want to explore that side of architecture. I went to the University of Oregon because that gave me great freedom to do a research-based master's, which way I could set my own parameters, and it gave me that reflective foundation. Then I continued to work in the US.
This was in the year?
I graduated from SPA in 78.
Okay.
I went to the US after 2.5 years. That was late 1980. I finished my master's in the US in early 82, and I worked there till mid 85. And I was working for a small firm in Philadelphia, just about 10 people, 10 to 12 people. And then one day, there were two partners, and one day one of the partners said, if you continue here, you can get onto a partnership track. And then I felt, okay, now I'm worthy of the trust.
That's amazing, sir. That's so good.
So don't, I find especially the younger generation today is very impatient. There's a kind of learning that can only come through patience. Because in Indian tradition, they call it sadhana or riyaz. There's a kind of learning that you can absorb into your body, which you will not get from a book, but you just get it from experience and rigorous practice, devoted practice. Um, and you have to allow that to develop to a point where you feel you have a voice of your own that is worth listening to. So my advice is, and I think that pays off in the long run. A lot of people think that, philosophical idealism. Yes, if I follow a purely business strategy, I might run more. In that case, I wouldn't be in architecture, I'd be in financial services or something. Because what you earn in some fields, you'll never earn as an architect. So if you're in architecture because you are in love with the discipline, that's what you feel is, intuitively, that's what I feel I'm meant to do. Then you need to find your own voice. If you just repeat the same voice that everyone else is speaking in, then what's different about you? Then the only way you can compete is by lowering your fees. That's happening with a lot of practices.
Yes, sir.
So if you find your own voice, then you need to find a way of articulating that voice where people say you're different. And that is good for business. Because then you don't have to lower your fees to the same extent.
You'll be automatically unique in the
Yeah,
entire.
you'll be unique. And I'm not saying that we have done that with total success, but we've never followed the chase the lowest common denominator. And we believe that it will not, apart, it will be both financially bad and it will be personally dissatisfying.
As you started with your first practice in India in CNT, who was your first client and how did you got it? Tell us the story from those days.
I came in as an associate. I joined the firm since I had experience, since I had worked overseas. I joined the firm as an associate. So I came in with a reasonable degree of autonomy. And the firm had been developing associates. And so Sanjay Mohe, Vasaki Prakash, me, Surya Narayan were all there before me. I was the last of the four to join. And we were given a fair degree of autonomy in running our projects. So one started with that, getting used to working in India again after I'd been away for 5 years. So there was a sort of period of adjustment. But I think in the 90s, early 90s was when I started really coming into my own. And the first large project I did was the first building that Infosys built.
Oh, directly with the Infosys.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And that was interesting. It was a very different company then. When we started dealing with them, there were 200 people in a not so nice rented building in Korabanga. So and they were funding the project through their IPO.
Hmm.
And then they had to postpone the IPO because there was that Harshad Mehta scam. Then even when they finally launched it, was hard to believe, but it was undersubscribed. And they had this real fear of spending money, so they had put very severe budget constraints. So it had to be a sort of very cost effective construction. And he said to them, "This is the first building of your own you're building, and it's going to shape your culture. Because the way you manage the firm will also shape your culture, but this will play a role." So, and they just gave us a general brief saying we want a building where 1,200 software engineers can work. So actually, we suggested let's go into it a little deeper before rushing into design. And we actually interviewed 6 or 7 different user groups within the company to understand who they were, what their culture, not just to get the tangible requirements like so many square feet for this and for that, but also the more intangible thing of how they interacted and what their culture was.
To reach out to the end user who is
Yeah.
going to use the
Yeah.
entire space.
Yes.
So you took interview with
We took different groups and we then documented a design brief and then we designed this building. So I think that was the first large project where I started exploring things on my own. And then I got a couple of house projects also that very interesting.
What was the biggest challenge you faced when you were managing everything on your own? Any challenge when you find on site or from your design to execution, what went missing or something which was difficult and you overcome? Any story from those days?
One thing that I learned, and I think that I learned in the US, when I started working there, I was actually quite intimidated of working in a foreign culture and a technology that was I was not used to. And I was a bit thrown in at the deep end there also. So I was assigned to work on a project. The design had already been done. I led the process of completing the working drawings. I joined a team where there was a senior architect, and then that senior architect left and went somewhere else. So then they said, "You run it now." Suddenly I was thrown in at the deep end, putting together these working drawings. Then the contractor was appointed. And then the first site meeting, the boss came with me and he ran the meeting. The second meeting, just before the meeting was about to start, we were all sitting around the table. I mean, the meeting is starting in another 2 minutes.
Okay.
He leans over to me and says, "I'll be quiet, you run the meeting."
Okay.
So those kind of situations where you're thrown in at the deep end and you're still quite young, I was still in my 20s. I just had a few years of experience, work experience, 3 years. And your fear is someone will ask you something that you don't. But fortunately, I realized that's not what people expect. What they expect of you is that even if they ask you something you don't know, you must have faith that you'll find out and you'll come to know. And that's the faith you have to give. So I think that it was something I learned then, and that served me well once I came and started running projects in India, and especially running a project like Infosys with the first building, which was 1,20,000 square feet and at 40,000 square feet. Never handled a complex project of that scale before.
Mm.
But I realized that that's really what people are looking for.
Correct.
So then that makes it a lot easier. So there are challenges all the time, but you just have to say, how do I find out the answer? And then I had the backing of a legacy firm. So if I didn't know how a construction detail or something, there are people I could ask. or even if I didn't need to ask, there were people outside the firm I could ask for. So, for example, Infosys set a very severe budget constraint.
Yes, sir.
And I realized that this is not doing conventional construction is not going to work. The constraint they have set. So thankfully, Bangalore has a very cohesive architecture culture where people are very cooperative. And the Kannade brothers had developed this system of construction they call the Chappi Kalu, with granite slabs.
Okay.
These precast blocks that you placed on, which had a hollow in the middle, and you placed one on top of the other with reinforcement on the middle. And there's a groove on either side, and you slid the granite slab. And you don't get those slabs, the Chappi slabs now, but at that time it was a very inexpensive material. Except they had only done it in houses. They'd never done it at scale. So I talked to them, I understood the logic of the system, and I talked to other people, a structural engineer. And we looked at the idea of doing it to scale. And we sort of worked out this hybrid system where the outer perimeter was with this Chappi Kalu system, and the inner you had RCC column. We worked out a way of doing that, and but they were very helpful. And I'm talking to another firm who has no stake in the project. And just go ask them questions, and they'd advise me. You didn't ask for anything; they just generously gave their advice and help. But I realized they had something that I didn't have, so I could go ask them, and I could find an answer.
Yes, sir.
So I think that's a principle. Don't think you have to know it all. You will never know it all. And in fact, that's the joy of it. I mean, I'm 70 years old and I feel alive because there's so much I don't know and so much I can still discover. So, and that's what you'll spend the rest of your life. You'll never know enough. But you have to know who to ask.
We started a campaign telling that why architecture is not considered a serious profession, why people are not considering having an architect, why is it considered a luxury or like an extra cost to have an architect but not to take the services. So what is your take on it? How do you see it? What is the client's perspective to see architecture as?
I think it's an easy cop out to blame the client.
Okay.
Say yes. And unfortunately, many architects say, "For me, I have these unsympathetic, uncultured clients, or so whatever. Don't understand what architecture is."
Hmm.
Firstly, okay, let's do a thought experiment.
Yes.
Imagine you're in any city that you're familiar with, and recollect walking around and looking at the buildings designed by professionally trained architects. It is a minority. I mean, architects only design some of the buildings, don't design everything in the city. But even if you look at what is done by professionally trained architects, what you'll find is a similar mix. And this, it doesn't matter whether you're in Bangalore, whether you're in New York, or whether you're in the mix is that the genre is the same. The genuinely creative work is actually a small minority. 80% or maybe more is not of the same quality. I wouldn't say that. It uh, it ranges from the ugly and functionally awkward to the slickly packaged and functionally resolved. But it stays within a notion of reproducing the familiar.
Yes, sir.
So that's the profession is doing that. It's not aiming at this. Let me use architecture as a propositional discipline that puts forward propositions on the value of life. A lot of architects just go in there saying, let me deliver a project and let the project look good.
Okay.
That's a very superficial way of looking at it. So I think for that, the profession needs to introspect. And I don't think we have articulated our case sufficiently properly. And how many architects will sort of work with that passion for life, saying, you know what, how they want to improve life and use architecture as a means to do it. It's unfortunately a minority. And our education system has also not trained us for that. And that's a problem that's especially bad in India because um,
Where is this missing happening? Because as architects, we are not coming forward with the, because if you see and doctor, okay, it's a serious profession. I give this example to most of the people that if you're sick, you will not tell until and unless you're really like not knowing what is wrong with you. You would take a consultancy with a doctor. If you are into a legal emergency, you will definitely take an advice from a lawyer. but why do people be like, I do not want an architect? I can get the entire house constructed or entire building constructed by a contractor who is, skill wise, he is sound, but they are ready to adjust the corridor size from like 1.2 meters to 1 meter or maybe 800 mm. So I'm just asking, why is it that mindset coming? Do architect needs to present themselves differently?
if the architect is driven by an inner light, it says, I don't want to, I want to go beyond creating an architecture that works, that's on budget, that looks good. I want to create an architecture that offers joy, offers beauty, offers provocation on how to live. That's what we should be doing. And until we do that, we will not differentiate ourselves from the other building. Which is why, and because of the lack of differentiation amongst the profession as a whole, that is why you get this situation where people will think I can go to a contractor and get this done, or go to an engineer and get this done. And recently there was not recently, but I think about, I don't know, 8, 9 years ago, there was a Supreme Court judgment which allowed engineers to practice. It said the Architects Act 1972 only protects the title of architect.
Yes, so recently they
Yeah.
gave the amendment.
Yeah. It doesn't protect the practice of architecture.
Yes.
And they said we can't go beyond that. We just have to go by a reading of the act. So now anybody can practice architecture as long as you don't call yourself an architect. That's what the law is right
Yes,
now.
sir.
And a lot of people, a lot of architects got very worked up and said, this is terrible.
Yes, it is.
And I said, I thought, I didn't think so.
Why, sir? Why is it so?
Because if you just protect the practice of architecture without talking about the value architecture offers, that's protectionism. You're breeding mediocrity.
But the entire point
I should
is,
feel the obligation to offer an aura of architecture and demonstrate the skill to produce that aura. That is that an engineer or contractor will never be able to do.
but how the layman would understand that?
If you have to explain it, you've lost the battle.
Oh, sir.
If
Because that point is
if you
lengthy.
see a sunset that is beautiful,
Yes, sir.
you need someone to explain it to you to find it beautiful.
You have to experience it.
Yeah. So you have to think what is the quality of experience. You have to think how does a scale relate to the of a space relate to the scale of the body. You have to think about what is it like to sit in a space and look across to other spaces and see the changing quality of light. And what joy will that give you? You have to think about what is the angle of the sun in the latitude that I practice. How is that how does that create a regional identity for? So that even if I do the most contemporary building, it will still be local because it only comes to life in the local sound.
Correct. So that way, what I see it as, let architect do the authority part of signing the drawings, for example, but let anybody can practice architecture. Let the engineer sign, but at the same panel, let architects also sign. It should not be either of them. It should be both of them. Is what I also believe that, because our architect's voice is through design. Whatever the space I'm creating is through my design. I do not have a voice. My space, what I'm creating is my voice. So what my thought is on this is, let the architect sign as well as the engineer sign. Both are necessary. Without a structural engineer, I cannot design. Similarly, structural engineer or civil engineer also should think, without an architect, you cannot also design. That's how the space can be created much better in India.
There are a lot of crafts people, craftsmen,
Yes,
who
sir.
build beautiful architecture.
Yes, sir.
Should they not be allowed to design?
They are allowed to design, but it should be a collaborative work, but not a individual based.
Traditional
Yes.
craft is
Yes.
inherently collaborative.
Yes, sir.
It's a cultural practice.
That is
it's not
welcome.
an egocentric practice.
Yes, sir.
So, but what a lot of traditional craft has sustained is an orientation towards beauty. It's an orientation towards how does this represent the cosmos right now, towards symbolism and beauty. And it's developed through its methods a certain warmth of material and scale. So that's what, if you, and this, you don't need an explanation. If someone sees that beauty, they recognize it.
Right, sir.
And that's what architecture should aim to do.
Right, sir.
The problem is we just take this transactional approach of delivering projects. It's why 80% of what we do reproduces the familiar. How can you reproduce the familiar? Every site is, every requirement is different. If I have to talk to you and if we are to become friends, you and I have to recognize each other's personality and acknowledge it.
Yes, sir.
You can't just go with sort of traditional sort of cliches.
That bond will not become.
That bond will not be there.
You're right.
So why should that be different for architecture? So you have to be in touch with what fires you up, what gives you joy, and see how to produce that in your architecture. And if you need to explain it, you've lost the battle.
Okay, sir. I'll keep that as a learning. As architects, what are the learnings, or what are the two more most important thing you want to give us young architects in terms of understanding the finance and the business aspect? Because as architects, we in college we are only learning about the design part or the execution material, but there is a gap which we are finding in the practice about the finance and the business, which we are not well versed with. Sometimes we lack it. So what are the learnings, or what is we should be equipped with when we are coming into practice?
There's some things that I've learned from specific people which have always guided me. One is a person who used to teach at Harvard Business School called David Maister. And unlike most of the professors in business schools who tend to focus on large corporations, he looked specifically at professional service firms.
Mm-hmm.
So he looked at architects, lawyers, engineers who ran their own practices. And he said there are two factors, what he called health and hygiene. And it's the parallel is your own body, right? You realize if you have to be healthy, you have to be hygienic. You can't be dirty, you have to wash your hands.
Okay.
But hygiene reaches a barrier beyond which the returns are diminishing. I need to bathe every day, I need to wash my hands before I eat or something. If I keep washing my hands every half an hour, it doesn't help. So there's a point to which hygiene can take you. You want to go further, you need health, which does not come from hygiene. You need to exercise, you need to eat moderately, you need to do all these things. And those are tied to your core of who you are, what he will tell you.
Right.
It's not based on certain principles.
Right.
So business and finance are hygiene factors. You need to pay attention to them. You can't ignore them, but then they don't determine who you are. So you just set up some key things like you set up a spreadsheet for each project, saying, okay, I expect to receive payment for schematic design here, for design development. I'll get in September, and then for GFC, I'll get in December. You set up that projection as per your contract, and you'll see how that adds up to the picture as a firm as a whole, and you have some spreadsheet which compares that to your expenses.
Right. Right.
So you look at that and say, am I doing okay? The other thing that I learned from someone I met who runs one of the world's largest architecture firms, and he said they follow a thing what they call backlog, which is what is the work you're contracted for, you sign an agreement for which you haven't got paid. And the other thing you have to realize about finance is something I read from a management consultant who also advises architects and engineers. And he said the bottom line is not the bottom line. And what he means is that if you ask someone who heads a large corporation where the last 5 years successful, the chances are they'll look at their balance sheet, profit and loss statement, market share, shareholder value, whatever. There would be some quantitative indicators that would shape the answer substantively. But if you ask an architect who's passionate about architecture for income tax and accounting reasons, they might be maintaining their balance sheet, profit and loss, but they will never think of looking at that to answer the question whether the last 5 years successful. They'll think, what buildings did I do in the last 5 years? Were they good buildings? Did they work well? Were they successful in doing what I set out to do? So the bottom line is an intangible bottom line. It's not a tangible bottom line.
Yes, sir.
So you have to keep that because that is what will differentiate you. That is where you will provide value in the intangible bottom line. So you keep the tangible bottom line as just an indicator. It's like a map. You keep looking at the map and saying, let's say you're driving to Pondicherry or something like that. There's one part of it where you're looking at the map and saying, am I going in the right direction? But there's another part of it where you enjoy the view, you roll down the windows, enjoy the breeze, you sort of enjoy driving because you have a nice car, whatever it is. So there's parts of it where you just feel, that this is what I'm meant to do. And the quantitative stuff will not give you that fulfillment in your life. So that's why I think David Maister's differentiation of health and hygiene is a good frame to look at it. You pay attention to the finance to make sure that you're not damaging your health because you're not following the hygiene. The hygiene is not what will make you healthy.
That's so true, sir. Now, how you're seeing technology is coming in, you have witnessed a 4 decade of life of architecture in India. What is your take where hand drawn drawings and explanation of the intent of the architect, and now we are moving towards CAD, BIM, and latest of now AI is coming in. What is your concern and what you are happy about?
Um, the concern is we lose touch with our human roots. For example, hand drawing, for me, it's important because the line I draw will be my line. No one else will draw the same line. Because it's like your handwriting.
Yes,
The
sir.
way you draw, no one else will draw. So it becomes a very direct exploration of who you are by drawing. You can draw with a certain degree of approximation. I'm working out a plan, I'm sketching out out at 1:100. So I draw two lines. I know they're more or less 5 meters apart. If I try and do it on the computer will want to know is it 4.9 or is it 5.1? It demands a degree of precision I'm not ready for.
Yes, sir.
I can draw one thing and draw another concept on top of that and another possibility on top of that, and only I can tell the difference. All that kind of exploration. Also, the scale, the paper is a fixed space. So, your sense of scale. I get very frustrated with the young architects in my office when I want to see something and they show it to me on the screen and they keep zooming in and zooming out and I keep saying, no, hold it, I can't get a sense of what you're doing if you keep doing that. But to hold an image stable is important to developing a sense of scale. And drawing promotes muscle memory. Memory is not just in our brains. Do we remember how to ride a bicycle? It's muscle memory, it's not the laws of physics. It's your entire body. So drawing, when I draw a line like that, it the memory is in my muscles, in my hand. And but the short repetitive movements that you do on a computer don't breed muscle memory. So eventually it's like Yohani Palasma writes, your hand also learns to think, not just your brain. So those things of that embodied connection with what you're doing, you have to sustain that because that's the goal. Eventually we're human and we're humans who have been shaped by thousands of years of evolution. You can't just shake off. And I think we'll become alienated if we just start depending on the machine for meaning. So use the technology as a tool. The thing with AI, it's not just a passive tool, it's an agentic tool. It has its own autonomy. So
Do you use AI in your office?
we use AI not in a very central way. We have, in terms of rendering and things like that, yes, we use AI there to look at what different, like if we've done a model in SketchUp, then to look at different possibilities. You can explore that much faster with AI prompts there. So we use it in that sense. We haven't brought it in any central way into design process. I use it quite a bit in my writing. Not to ask the AI to write, but in doing research, in critiquing my own text, in maybe editing it if it's become too long. I use AI. So it's useful as long as you are in touch with the core of who you are and that core is connected to your work. Then you can use it as a tool. If you expect the technology to uh, do it all for you, then you lose sight of your goal. That's the important thing.
So, as we mentioned, that Architecture Playbook is actually digitally documenting the entire life cycle of the project. What is your take on it for the future? Having an entire document from the beginning of the project till then, how useful it is, how we can actually make it better.
That's a huge question. There are all kinds of things we can do it better, but I'd rather go to the aspect of staying in touch with the core. And there was a house I was designing for someone, and it was the first house. They were people who recently become wealthy. They were in a very small house, and they're building a large house for the first time. And it was the wife I was dealing with mostly. She was the one who was most involved. And she said, I used to get very nervous doing this house and spending money on a house and doing the right thing and all that. And she said, the strange thing that gave me reassurance was seeing you arrive at the site and you'd get out of the car and you'd start looking at the house and this slightly goofy expression would come over your face. That gave me trust that something right is happening over here. So that thing where you can go and the first thing that you comes over you when you look at the site is, are you captivated by it? You move by it, and that shows. So that's what I talk about. That connection has to say. Having documenting the process of the kind of things that you said you are working on is obviously useful.
Yes, sir.
You have to be careful to stay in touch.
The connection should always
Yeah.
be there.
And there's a lovely essay by a structural engineer called Robert Stillman. I think it's titled Thinking in Approximations. And he's quite elderly and he began his career in the 1960s. And in those days, there weren't even handheld calculators, let alone computer time. Because handheld calculators came in the 1970s. And computers, there were few mainframes. It was very difficult for any practice to get time on them. And so he used to do his calculations with a device called a slide rule, which probably no one of your generation will even know what that is. But it's actually a mechanical calculator which has two graded scales on the outside, a central bit also graded that moves back and forth, and a cursor you can also slide back and forth. And it uses logarithmic functions to do your calculation. And it will give you an answer, but it will be ambiguous about where the decimal point is.
Okay.
So to know whether the correct answer is 10 or 100 or 1000, you have to have a contextual feel. I think the computer is the precise thing that will do everything. And therefore they don't try to build that embodied feel. And he says they'll show me a printout of a long structural analysis or something, and I'll just flip through it and say, this is not optimized, you could set it up differently. And the youngsters, he says they are bewildered and they'll say, how did you find that so fast? And he'll say that was the way I've trained. Because, I mean, think of the fact that your brain, with all the resources it has, to come even reasonably close, the AI industry has to build these huge data centers all over the world using gigawatts of energy and million liters of cooling water. And they still haven't come close to what is happening here. So there is certain elegance that comes from an embodied field, which, and that's the important part. So if you can find digital tools, great, but don't lose sight of that. Don't learn how to think in approximations, so that you're don't jump into levels of precision you're not ready for. Get your sense of scale by hand drawing and muscle memory. Look at ways you can keep that embodied connection.
Sure, sir.
Because at the end of it, we're humans before we are architects. When to try and say everything from an architectural point of view when we're dealing with architectural questions. But at the core, we have to learn what it is to be human. And that is a core that is experiential, not intellectual. Everyone tends to think about artistic matters and they say it's very subjective.
Mm.
And the example, I think, is recollect going to see a good comedy film. You're in the movie hall with 200 other people who you don't know at all. Something funny happens in the film and all 200 people laugh at the same time. You ever pause to think how mind-boggling that is? That in that split second, that funny thing goes and infects
Everyone is
radically different people. So that is why when I said earlier, if you need to explain it, you've lost the battle. And the person making that funny movie will actually come to the core of what is it. It would have been understood just experienced enough. So that's the thing that we have to stay in touch with to make sure we don't get destabilized by the technology. I think the thing I'd say is it's not the tools you use, it's not the processes you use, it's actually who you are. And to give you an example, one of the most profound teaching experiences I had was many years ago. And a whole group of us had gone to the Malnad College of Engineering in Hassan. And we were paired up to talk to students, and my friend Namnath Kanade and I were paired to talk to a first year batch who were designing their first architectural project. And we were talking to this young girl who said, who was terrified, and she said, I can't do it because she'd only done basic design so far. She was being asked to do her first architectural design. We asked her, why can't you do it? And they had to design a kindergarten. And she said, there has to be a path from the front door to the front gate of the compound. I don't even know how wide that path should be. How can you expect me to design a whole building? And somehow Navnath and I didn't answer her directly. I said, okay, well, when you walk, how much space do you take? Well, this is a kindergarten. You're leading a child by the hand. How much space does that take? Or you might meet someone coming from the other direction. They also might be leading a child by the hand. And step by step, she arrived at the conclusion that she needed to make the path roughly 2.5 meters wide. And when she arrived at that conclusion, Navnath said to her, we knew the answer. Why did you ask us? And I will never forget the light in her eyes because I don't believe it was because she discovered the width of a path, but she had discovered that she could interrogate her own experience to find the answer to a question that puzzled her. And ultimately, that's at the core. Seek to become that kind of a person where you're always thirsty for learning. And eventually, that will also be good for business because if clients perceive you as that kind of a person, they'll realize that you're internally driven by a standard that's higher than whatever they could demand. That is the foundation of trust. So don't focus on the external trappings, the glamorous imagery, the sophisticated technology, or any other thing. Just focus on who you are and make that the foundation of your life. Where you're always that curious, searching, seeking person who's driven by a fire within.
Thank you so much, sir. It was actually a spiritual journey for architecture I was taking with you. As you were telling about the years, I was actually trying to be there 1970s and then coming back to 2026 and to latest technologies as well. This entire podcast was really full of knowledge for me. Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.